Yesterday, the new Pope was officially announced to the public. So we thought we'd release a special video about the history of the Papacy, its territorial manifestation that is today Vatican City, and how once upon a time used to be significantly bigger, and how both of these are portrayed in our favourite strategy game, Crusader Kings 3. The Papacy, as one of the oldest institutions in the world, has played an ever-changing role in history. In antiquity, its most important function was to spread the Christian message for the young burgeoning religion. In the early Middle Ages, they were vital in resolving various doctrinal disputes. Later, they played an important role in arbitrating and mediating between Christian monarchs and organising crusades to forcefully spread Christianity. This is what makes the Papacy so relevant for Crusader Kings. Modern popes, on the other hand, are mostly involved in promoting Christian values, interfaith dialogue which includes ecumenism, and defending human rights. So we see that the history of the Pope changed in the course of European history, but the same is the case for the Pope's domain. Therefore, in the first half of the video, I'll delve into the general history of the Papacy, also outlining the origins and developments of the Papal State as a political entity. In the second part of the video, I'll then discuss the Papacy's portrayal in CK3, as well as the popes that are featured in the game's 3 starting dates. If you like our content in which we talk about history, geography, and historically inspired strategy games, remember to subscribe to never miss a video. If you have input or suggestions, feel free to comment or contact us directly on our Discord, which is linked in the video's description. So without further ado, let's explore the history of the Papacy, with History in Bits. According to Christian tradition, the Pope, the Bishop of Rome and thus for Catholics, the Supreme Pontiff, goes back to the Apostle St. Peter, who is said to have founded the Holy See of Rome and is therefore considered the first Pope. What's important to clarify in the beginning is that in the first few centuries after the death of Jesus Christ, the title of Pope, derived from ancient Greek papas, meaning father, was basically a term that could be applied to all bishops. It was only with the reign of Pope Leo I as Bishop of Rome in the 5th century that it became reserved to the title of the Roman bishop, giving him supremacy over other bishops, and this system was only codified for the Western Church during the Great Schism between Catholics and Eastern Orthodox in the 11th century. And looking at the list of popes in antiquity, we see that many of the early bishops of Rome did not actually come from Rome. St. Peter himself obviously came from Judea. There is one called St. Victor I in the late 2nd century, who was a Roman Berber born in North Africa. And there are a number of listed popes who were born in Greece or in what the Romans called Hierosolima, today's Jerusalem. Before Emperor Constantine's 313 Edict of Milan, which essentially legalized Christianity, the Papacy constituted an oppositional force to the ancient Roman Empire. So it is no wonder Rome as a city in the early history of Christianity was not able to exert the Christian influence it later did. But this opposition not only existed in terms of power and politics, but it also had a more philosophical dimension. As the famous 19th century German historian Leopold von Ranke phrases it, the emperor united politics and religion. Christianity studiously separated what was God's from what was Caesar's. The offering of sacrifices to the emperor implied the most abject civility. Just where, in the early constitution of Rome, there was full independence, that is, the union of religion with the state, there was now the seal of subjection. When believers were forbidden by Christianity to sacrifice to the emperor, the prohibition involved an act of emancipation. After Constantine's Edict of Milan, however, the rules of the game changed and Christianity became mainstream. Constantine even gave the Lateran Palace to the Bishop of Rome, which is not in today's Vatican City, but rather lies in the eastern part of the city. But with the Christian Church officially owning property in Rome, it can still be considered a first step to Rome becoming the capital of Western Christianity, and to the Papacy having its own domain to govern. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire, there was a short period marked by the Ostrogothic kingdom, and then a longer period of about 2 centuries dominated by the Eastern Roman Empire. But with the rise of Francia, the Roman Church finally moved away from Constantinople and looked to the northwest for protection, which the Franks were willing to provide. This began with Pope Zachary, who crowned the Frankish king Pepin as king in 751, in order for Pepin to fight the Lombards for him. Pepin did defeat the Lombards and gifted some of their lands to the papacy. The relationship between popes and Franks became even closer with the successors of the two. First, Pepin's son, Charlemagne, codified the papal doctrine in 781 and defined it as consisting of the Duchy of Rome, the Duchy of Pentapolis along the Adriatic coast, Tuscany, Lombardy, and even the island of Corsica. So with Pepin's donation in 751 and Charlemagne's codification of 781, the medieval papal state we know so well from history officially came into existence. Then, almost 20 years later, on Christmas Day in 800, Pope Leo III proclaimed Charlemagne emperor, marking the beginning of the medieval relationship between pope and emperor. This relationship defined much of medieval European politics in the High Middle Ages. While the Frankish and the early Holy Roman Emperors had supported the papacy, tensions eventually grew over who held ultimate authority. This struggle climaxed during the investiture controversy of the 11th century, when Pope Gregory VII and Emperor Henry IV clashed over the right to appoint bishops, leading to Henry's dramatic penance walk to Canossa in 1077, which we already talked about in our video on CK3's Holy Roman Empire in 1066. The Concordat of Worms in 1122 later found a compromise, balancing papal and imperial powers. The conflict between Frederick Barbarossa and successive popes over Italian territories further strained relations. We will talk about this in a future video on the HRE in Crusader Kings in the new starting date. But basically throughout the Middle Ages, emperors sought to assert dominance over Italy and the papacy, while popes leveraged alliances and excommunications to maintain independence. By the late Middle Ages, the papacy even relocated to Avignon in order to get protection from the Kingdom of France from the emperors. So from 1309 to 1377, Rome wasn't actually the seat of the papacy, Avignon was. The papal state reached its greatest extent in 1649, including most of central Italy, extending north all the way into Romagna, also actually still holding Avignon in France and the lands around it, plus some smaller exclaves in southern Italy. And it held this territory all the way to the French Revolution in 1789 and the subsequent Napoleonic Wars. During the Napoleonic Wars, the Papal States faced major upheaval. In 1796, Napoleon's forces invaded northern Italy, forcing Pope Pius VI to sign the Treaty of Tolentino, ceding territory and paying indemnities. But tensions remained, and in 1798, French troops occupied Rome, declaring a Roman Republic and forcing Pius into exile, where he died a year later. The Kingdom of Naples tried to restore the Papal State in 1800, but the French army quickly drove them out and reoccupied Rome. There was a new pope elected called Pius VII, but Napoleon again took control in 1808, arresting the defiant pope and annexing the remaining papal territories into his Italian puppet state. After Napoleon's defeat, the 1815 Congress of Vienna gave the Papal States back to Pius VII, reinstating papal rule over central Italy. This restoration lasted until Italian unification in the mid-19th century, when the Papal States were finally absorbed into the Kingdom of Italy in the 1870 Italian invasion of Rome, the final step in the Italian unification process that also marked the end of the Papal State as a significant sovereign entity. The Pope at this time, Pius IX, refused to recognize the new Italian state's authority over Rome. Pope Pius IX declared himself a prisoner in the Vatican, withdrawing from public life and remaining in the Apostolic Palace that is even today in the center of Vatican City. This period, known as the Roman Question, saw popes reject Italy's legitimacy over formal papal lands, and some Catholics across Europe in fact supported this stance, refusing to engage politically with the Italian state, seeing it as illegitimate. This issue was finally resolved with the Lateran Treaty, signed in 1929 between Pope Pius XI and Benito Mussolini's fascist Italy. This treaty recognised Vatican City as an independent sovereign state under papal control and granted the Church compensation for lost territories. In return, the papacy recognised the Kingdom of Italy and Rome as its capital. It is a less known fact that the treaty also established Catholicism as Italy's state religion. Comparing today's Vatican City to its territorial peak in 1789, the papacy have lost over 99.9% of its landmass, making it the largest decrease of landmass of any modern sovereign state. So after this brief history of the papacy and its territorial evolution throughout history, let's look at how Crusader Kings 3 portrays the papacy, the popes, and the papal state. The game mechanics of the Pope, his titles and his abilities, are admittedly complex. The game's own encyclopedia defines the Pope as a spiritual head of faith as opposed to a temporal head of faith, like a caliph, who would lose his titles if he lost all his lands. It elaborates on this by clarifying that a spiritual head of faith is theocratic and does not have to be landed, although they can be. Spiritual heads of faith usually have access to interactions such as being able to grant claims or gold. Should the doctrines of the faith allow for great holy wars, then they will be undirected. So the Pope, as a particularly powerful spiritual head of faith, can grant gold, claims, and organise crusades in which individual Catholic leaders can choose to support the crusade financially or lead their armies to the lands the Pope wants to invade for the Catholic cause. The Pope can also excommunicate characters that won't follow his lead, which is one of the reasons why it is so difficult to successfully take control of his lands. By the way, when a Pope dies in Crusader Kings 3, not unlike in real life, a new Pope is chosen from the pool of Catholic bishops, characters with the bishop trait. The game usually selects one with high learning, decent piety, and good traits. You don't get to control or influence who gets picked, unless you are the Pope via a mod. This will reset your relationship with the papacy, and if the old Pope excommunicated you, the new one might reverse that decision if he likes you. In rare cases when a Pope dies, minor events can pop up, but unfortunately, unlike in Crusader Kings 2, there are no conclave-style mechanics for events. Anyway, starting with the first available start date in vanilla Crusader Kings 3, in 867. The Pope that is featured here is Pope Nicolaus. He is shown as diligent, calm, and zealous, also possessing the education traits charismatic negotiator and august. He is Catholic, of course, and Italian. While the latter could just as the former be mistakenly taken as a given, as we have heard already, in the centuries before this, popes frequently came from faraway places like today's Middle East or North Africa. Nicolaus I reigned from 858 to late 867, meaning the game depicts him shortly before his death, which also explains his ailing health. Also known as Nicholas the Great, he firmly asserted the supremacy of the papacy over secular rulers and bishops, shaping the Church's role in European politics. One of his major conflicts was with King Lothair of Lotharingia, who in 862 sought to divorce his wife Teutberga. As you can see by the fact that in the game Lothair of Lotharingia is still married to Teutberga, Nicholas refused to sanction the divorce, upholding church law despite political pressure, reinforcing the Church's authority over marriage. If you look closely though, Lothair pretty much did what he wanted anyway, fathering several children with his mistress Valderrada, who you can also see in the game as these children's mother. Nicholas I also clashed with the Eastern Church by opposing the appointment of a new Patriarch of Constantinople, which strained relations between Rome and Constantinople. This reflected the gradual shift of the Roman papacy away from the Byzantine Empire and towards the new Western European emperors. Moving on to 1066, we can already see that the papal lands in this start date are more extended, hinting to an increased power of the Pope here. In 1066, the Pope is shown as Pope Alexander II, compassionate, forgiving and just, and also a scholar and apparently mastermind philosopher. Just as Nicholas I, this guy was also an Italian. More precisely, he was born in Milan, and was a stern critic of the practice of allowing marriage among the Milanese clergy at the time. At first, I thought that it was Alexander who our good old friend Matilda of Tuscany is said to have had a thing with. But that was actually his successor, Gregory, who made Kaiser Henrik IV walk to Matilda's home Canossa to repent. Alexander II is also famous for another 1066 contemporary event, namely for authorising the Norman conquest of England. This is a bit surprising, seeing as Alexander, as a leader of the Papal State, had his own Normans to worry about just next to him in the south of Italy. Duke Richard of Capua, correctly portrayed in the game with his son Jordan, was giving the Pope trouble by leading a campaign to the outskirts of Rome in late 1066. Pope Alexander II also sanctioned the Crusade of Barbastro, in which a large force composed of armies from all over Europe conquered the northern Spanish city from the Muslims as part of the Reconquista. While the Reconquista later turned pretty ugly not just for Muslims but also for Jews, we have a very telling quote directly from Pope Alexander regarding the subject, in which he instructed the Crusaders to protect the Jews who live among you, so that they may not be killed by those who are setting out for Spain against the Saracens, further explaining that the situation of the Jews is greatly different from that of the Saracens. One may justify fight against those who persecute Christians and drive them from their towns and their own homes. But it was, apparently, always Alexander's interest to protect Europe's Jewish population. In a letter to Landulf of Benevento, he makes clear that the conversion of Jews is not to be obtained by force, praising bishops who prevented massacres of Jews in their counties. At last, we want to talk a bit about the Pope in the most recent start date of 1178. Confusingly, after the middle start date that has Alexander II, here we have Pope Alexander III of the Bandinelli family. Despite already being 73 years old, he is shown to be in good health, which is fairly accurate as Alexander III still reigned for 3 more years at this point. Throughout his papacy, Alexander III faced 4 anti-popes: Victor IV, Pascal III, Calixtus III, and Innocent III. These were all supported by Emperor Frederick Barbarossa due to his long-lasting quarrel with the papacy. They prolonged the schism for nearly 2 decades as the emperor sought to dominate the Catholic Church. Alexander, however, stood firm, excommunicating Frederick and the anti-popes and gradually regaining influence, especially after the Kaiser's military defeats we already mentioned regarding Frederick Barbarossa. A final thing worth mentioning is that Alexander III supported Thomas Becket in his dispute with King Henry II of England, defending church rights. We already talked about this in our video on Catholic holy sites in Crusader Kings 3, which we can recommend to you as a great follow-up at this point, and which you can see recommended on screen now. Thank you for staying with us until the end. If you look at the new Pope, what CK3 traits would you ascribe to them? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more history in bits.